Talk back to me. Good afternoon. Okay, now that I have your attention, everybody, shh. Thank you. So yesterday was really rough. Do we agree? Who was in the room yesterday at lunch? It was really rough. And it was maybe just a little disrespectful to our speakers yesterday. And so I'm humbly asking on behalf of the Board of Directors and the Housing California and our amazing panelists today, we want you to enjoy the amazing lunch, but we want you to shh. But first, can we clap it up for our panelists yesterday? I want them to know how much we appreciate you and we thank you. And it was rough, but you all were phenomenal. So thank you. So shh. My name is Kendra Roberts, and I'm the Vice President of Operations for Human Good Affordable Housing, and I'm also the second Vice President for the Board of Directors for Housing California. And I'm so excited to be with you all here today, and I hope that you all are having an amazing day so far. Yes, thank you. We're very excited. This year's Housing California Conference has over 2,000 attendees, and we sold out. Is that amazing? I think that it's the San Diego. Could that be the reason? The weather, even though it's raining a little bit today, but I think that the location really increased our participation. Before we dive into our discussion about growing powerful movements to effective change, I want to thank Wells Fargo for serving as the title sponsor for this plenary. Please enjoy the following video while Stephanie Kowski-Gamer, CEO of Los Angeles Family Housing, joins us on stage to provide a few remarks on behalf of our title sponsor, Wells Fargo. And remember, shh. Thank you.
Wells Fargo has donated $390 million.
Mom, is this one really mine? Honey, like I said, you get your own room.
To support housing affordability solutions for families across America. When a bank does what it says, more people can find a place to call their own. Doing gets it done. Wells Fargo, the bank of doing.
Kendra, thank you for the introduction, and I hope you enjoyed the brief video about Wells Fargo. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Kowski-Gamer, President and CEO of LA Family Housing. I'm proud to be here. Woohoo! I'm proud to be here on behalf of Greg Shurkin, the chair of LA Family Housing's Board of Directors and also a leader at Wells Fargo Bank. And I appreciate having an opportunity to represent the bank. Say hi to Greg. Okay. Those of us in the affordable housing and development community knows that Wells Fargo is a strong leader and partner in addressing the needs of our state's housing insecure. Their support of Housing California and sponsorship of the conference, including today's plenary, reflects the bank's strong commitment to building safe, stable, affordable, and sustainable homes for vulnerable Californians. The billions of dollars Wells Fargo invests across the country are critical to what we all do. But at LA Family Housing, it is their heart and personal commitments to who we work with that truly sets Wells apart. For those of you who are unfamiliar with LA Family Housing, we are a leading affordable and supportive housing developer in Los Angeles, as well as one of our region's largest homeless service providers. Our team of over 500 staff provides critical wraparound support to Angelinos on every step of their journey out of homelessness, from conducting street-based outreach to begin the process of moving home, to developing and operating more than 30 properties of interim and permanent housing across the county. We work with each and every person who comes through our door, whether they be a family, an individual, seniors, veterans, or one of the numerous marginalized populations that has fallen through the cracks of our region's social safety net. We work with all to provide the unique housing and supportive services that ends homelessness in their lives and enables them to regain personal stability and to thrive. Our philanthropic partnership with Wells Fargo Bank has led to some of our most impactful and innovative work ending homelessness. First, Wells Fargo was an early supporter of Arroyo, which stands for A Room of Our Own, a digital tool created by LA Family Housing that helps match potential housemates who can co-rent a shared housing unit. Arroyo is being piloted now across our region and is enabling us to end homelessness more quickly by utilizing housing that is readily available in the market. More recently, Wells Fargo has provided instrumental support for Inside Safe, a new ambitious encampment resolution program that LA Family Housing has helped develop and execute alongside the City of LA's new mayor, Karen Bass. This program ensures that many of our unhoused neighbors can move inside safely with and within the communities they choose as they transition out of homelessness. And finally, we so appreciate the Wells Fargo team leading with their feet as much as with their dollars. We are grateful for the hours of volunteer engagement from various teams within the bank. Most recently, Wells Fargo staff joined LA Family Housing to set up the apartments at one of our newly completed developments, Summit View Apartments, a 49-unit permanent supportive housing community for veterans, which we developed in partnership with our colleagues at Many Mansions. The Wells Fargo team came on site, they made beds, they hung shower curtains, they filled the kitchen cabinets with glasses and pots and pans and dishware. In short, they turned empty housing units into welcoming homes for our new residents. Our collective work as an industry is to serve our participants and residents. We can't do that without the exceptional and diverse staff at each of our agencies. We can't do this work without all of you. Together, we are innovating and transforming systems that change lives. It is now my honor to introduce this afternoon's plenary. During this plenary, we all have the opportunity to hear from prominent leaders working at the local, state, and national levels to explore how they see transformative systems change. Here to guide us through this lively and thoughtful discussion is Dr. Tiffany Manuel, also known as Dr. T. Woo! Dr. T, Dr. T is the founder and CEO of The Case Made. She has worked with thousands of passionate social change makers, innovators, and adaptive leaders around the country who are building better and stronger communities that are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Dr. T, please join me on the stage with your esteemed colleagues so we can officially kick off this plenary.
Well, good afternoon. Okay, you know what? We're not having this. No. Let's try it again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Better, but we're gonna do this one more time. Let me scoot up in my chair here. Good afternoon. There we go. I am so excited to be here with all of you and with my colleagues at Housing California to help celebrate the work that we are doing all across the state to make sure that everybody across the state has a home that they deserve. This is such important work. You wouldn't be here if you didn't think so as well. And so I'm excited to be here to celebrate the work that we're doing together across the state. And I'm especially excited to be joined by two of my colleagues who are doing fantastic power building work right now across the state. I'm joined today by Joseph Tomas McKellar, who's also the Executive Director of PICO, California. Welcome, Joseph. And I'm also joined by Kira Green, who leads the Center on Policy Initiatives. Welcome, Kira. Thank you. Now, I will say that we've had some great plenary sessions, fantastic. In fact, the last one was outstanding. So I feel like we really have to show out, folks. This is the last one before we end the conference. I feel like we really have to make it worth the people's time to be here, in addition to the chicken that folks are and some of the tofu that folks are getting.
We're gonna try it.
So I'm gonna ask you to be super candid, frank, and let's really get down to the business of talking about what it means to be building power in a time such as this, right? This is an incredible time where the national conversation around a great many issues is a little shaky. We're having conversations just nationally about things that I thought we had decided. See, I thought that at some point we had decided as a society, for example, that everybody deserved the right to vote. Didn't y'all think that was true? Did y'all get that memo? We had, that everybody should have the right to do that. And I thought that was a done deal. And now I find that we're having conversations about who should be voting, under what conditions, and a whole series of policies pushing us, many folks, especially Black and brown folks, away from that conversation. So I'm confused. See, I thought we had made some decisions, right, at the most basic level about the ability to choose the health of our bodies, especially for women. I thought we had decided that. So I'm confused about the fact that we're now having conversations about when and under what conditions, right, folks get the right to choose what happens to their bodies. I thought we had decided that people could love whoever they wanted to love, and they could marry whoever they wanted to love, right? And so we would have that handle. So I'm confused, right? So I thought we were just simply moving on to the next level of conversation about what it meant for shelter, about what it meant for folks to have a place to stay that they could thrive in, and that would be the end of it, that would be the next frontier. So I'm confused about what's happening nationally because I thought we had decided that. Here's what I'm not confused about. That the way we get back to some real agreements nationally and here in California about those issues is through organizing everyday people to make it happen. Okay, I'm gonna say that again because I'm not sure we kind of got that. So let me say it again so that there's no confusion in this issue. That the only way to get back, right, to those agreements is to organize everyday folks, not just the folks who are showing up in advocacy spaces, not just the folks who have nice jobs and institutions, but it's everyday people who are waking up unable to afford where they live and saying something is wrong. I'm gonna say one more thing, and my folks on my team know that I hate to go negative because at the case made, like we know that a part of getting people excited about the journey we're on is to make sure that we are aspirational about the future we're headed to. But I just want to really center us in the moment that we're in, right? It's a moment of great potential and great challenge for a great many of us nationally. And I want to say, for those of us in this room, there is a recognition, I hope, right, that there's something fundamentally wrong when the basic kinds of things that we need for our well-being are not provided, and housing is certainly one of those. Something's right when we get together and decide together that there's something we can do about it, and we start to empower people to do that work. We start educating folks about how we got here in the housing system, because we didn't get here yesterday, folks. Y'all know that, right? I'm sorry, do y'all know that? I'm sorry, do y'all know that? We didn't just get here yesterday. In other words, we didn't get to a housing crisis yesterday. There's a long history of undermining the success of folks in this country in terms of housing. And so understanding that and educating folks about that history is core to our work. Shifting the narrative about how we get here is core to our work. And organizing people into that work is super important. So I want to start here. I got two experts who are power building, who do this work every day, who are having people live into their power and showing up, right, for the work that we have to do. So I want to start with a lot of questions that I know people have at their tables. First of all, let's just do a little bit of introduction. Joseph, why don't I start with you? Introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work that you do at PICO.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. T. Kira, it's an honor to do this with you. This is so intimidating. The room is so cavernous and big, and I kind of wish we were at happy hour still last night out on the patio. I saw a lot of y'all hanging out after dark. Yeah, I mean, PICO is a statewide, faith-based, multiracial network of community organizations who have a vision for a state where all people can belong and thrive. Not just to survive, but to thrive. And this morning I was on a call with some of my colleagues, and one of my colleagues shared a quote from a theologian named Walter Brueggemann, who wrote The Prophetic Imagination. And I just want to read what she shared. Walter Brueggemann said, "We need to ask not whether it is realistic or practical or viable, but whether it is imaginable." We need to ask not whether it is realistic or practical or viable, but whether it is imaginable. And I think as an organization, as a network that is trying to accompany those most directly impacted by the injustices that Dr. T described, that all of you are very aware of, our job is to help expand people's imagination about what the world can become, why the world is the way it is, and their role in it. Because the reality is we all tell ourselves a story about why the world is the way it is and our role in it. And most poor and oppressed people experience the world not as authors, but as consumers, as people who have no agency in shaping the world around them. They are told to accept the injustice that they experience in their lives, and that there's other people in charge making decisions that every day affect their well-being. And so PICO's job is to help try to change that story. And one person who texted me just as I was coming on stage is a woman named Gloria Morales, who actually is one of our leaders here in San Diego, works with CPI. She's a member of the San Diego Organizing Project. I met Gloria 10 years ago when I was organizing here in San Diego. Gloria is an immigrant mother. When I met her, she spoke no English, but I knew that from getting to know her in her church, that her kids had no health insurance. And she worried about their well-being. She worried about a catastrophe. If they were to have one, she complained about having to wait hours in the line of a public clinic to get even just a vacuna, a vaccination for her kids. And PICO at the time was working to pass legislation in Sacramento that would expand access to healthcare for all kids. And I asked Gloria if she would be open to getting on an airplane and coming to Sacramento to share her story with people in positions of power, people who could make a choice to devote resources to cover all kids with health insurance, regardless of documentation. And I'll never forget, she told me in Spanish, she said, "¿Quién soy yo, Jose?" She said, "Who am I?" She said, "I'm just an immigrant mom. I don't speak English. You've got the wrong person. My job is to stay home and take care of my kids." And I think in organizing in those moments, our job is not to say, "No, Gloria, you are enough. You should get on this airplane. You have a story to tell." Instead, organizing is about asking the question to her, who told you that story about yourself? Who told you you're not enough? Who told you that an immigrant woman who only speaks Spanish can't create change in her life and in the world around her? And to ask her, Gloria, is that story accurate? Is that the person you are being called by your God, by your Creator, to be in the world? Is that the mother your children need you to be? And a couple days later, she called me and said, I'm going on that airplane, Jose. She said, it's going to be my first time on an airplane. She got on an airplane and she went to Sacramento. She met with legislators. She got emotional being under the Capitol Rotunda. A couple years ago, during the pandemic, we had coffee outside of San Diego City College, just down the street from here. And she said, Jose, at this time now, she's led actions. She's on our board of directors. She actually, this coming in 2 weeks, is going to be leading a 700-person action in Sacramento to try to pass SB 567, which is the Homelessness Prevention Act. But she said, Jose, she says, do you know what that is across the street? I said, that's the college, right? She says, yeah. She says, I'm a student there. She says, I'm going to get my associate degree. I'm learning English. And she said, Jose, she said, I want you to know that if I hadn't gotten on that airplane 10 years ago, I would not be doing this today.
Yeah.
I would not be a leader that I am today. So Gloria's imagination about who she is and what the world should be around her is expanded. And that is organizing. It is about finding the Glorias in our communities and inviting them on a journey to become more expansive versions of themselves.
I love that. Me too. That's beautiful. I love that. And I want to just riff off that, and I want to just say, that's exactly right. In the work that I do in case making, what you just described is talking people back into their power. We've been stripped of the notion that we deserve the right and have the opportunity to speak up for the things that we need to thrive. And you were talking her right back into her power. And I want to say that is a skill set, right? One that I hope all of you who are listening are thinking about how you incorporate that into your work. We don't just produce units of housing, right? That transactional stuff, if you looked at the title of the plenary today, that's transactional. We're talking about transformation, and that only comes from people who have not been offered the opportunity to be in the space, to own it, right? To own their power in the space. That's fantastic. We're going to come back to that. Lots of great stuff. We're going to come back to that. Karen, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Talk a little bit about your work, the work that you've done, and what makes you excited to do that work.
I'm happy to talk about it. I think you all just heard why I love to do this work. I get to work with people like Joseph and with the PICO affiliate here, San Diego Organizing Project. I work at the Center on Policy Initiatives here in San Diego, and we call ourselves the People's Think Tank. And part of that is, for me, the inspiration is the other piece of it. Not all of us come to this work directly as organizers, but all of us have a responsibility to organize. And so our work at CPI is really about making sure that the institutions that affect working people hear the voices of working people and respond to their agenda and their needs. And that starts for us with research. And I think that's a strange thing. I was trained as a researcher. I have a PhD in sociology. I think a lot of people thought I would spend all of my life in a classroom. And I think I do, because what CPI allows us to think about is that the whole world is a classroom for us, a space where we're all learning, but that our responsibility is to do research that doesn't talk about people, but is shaped by them. We are directed in our work. When someone asks me what projects are we working on, it's some project that someone in the community said, I want to know the answer to this. How much money does the county have? How much of it can be spent on housing? Or we have a question like, is this really the way it has to be? What are the laws that protect me from wage theft? What can we do to change it? So we do the research in community, and we don't ever produce outcomes of that research. We don't make recommendations that aren't also returned back to that community. So we go back and say, this is what we found. Now, what's the answer? What do you think from your experience, from the life that you live? Right. And then that leads to our policy advocacy work, and it makes it powerful and strong, because many people think they can do policy work with just an abstraction. It doesn't live out in the world. That's the first thing we find at CPI. You can pass a policy, but there are millions of laws on the books somewhere that are supposed to protect people. The people of the community have to own those programs, those laws, and make sure that they're made real and lived into and enforced and funded and all of those things. So that is the piece where every researcher also has to be an organizer. But to be fair, we work with really good organizers inside our organization and in the community. Because once we're doing that, we are doing that work in coalition. And those coalitions, when I say we work on the things that affect working people, there's not just their working conditions at their jobs, although that's super important, but there's housing, there's the punishment and justice system, there is, how we deal with our environment and whether it's a safe and healthy place to live. So our goal at CPI is always to be changing institutions so they allow people to thrive, which I think speaks to me all the time, Joseph, that it's about thriving, not just surviving, that it's about human rights, that is what people have a right to. In this country, the language of entitlement is often used as to dismiss people. But why wouldn't people be entitled to the basic things that they need to live full and happy and fulfilled lives? And so I think a lot of our work is also about that, having a conversation about the narrative and the right to live free and happy, which is not something I think a lot of people think of researchers talking about as being free and happy. And then we do work to support leadership development. That is, we believe that everyday people can go and serve on boards and commissions, that they can run, we don't support elected officials, but that pathway that gets people into leadership that then leads some people to the role of running for office and being elected, we think that's for everyone. And so just when you were talking about Gloria, that speaks to me, like both my experience of working with her, but many Glorias in our community, that sometimes all we need to do, and we talk about this a lot at CPI, that all we need to do is liberate information and spaces.
That's right.
We need to make it so people feel like this is yours and you can walk in here and you can set the agenda. And we will get out of the way. We will help remove the jargon and the processes that make everything feel very mysterious, when the things that we're fighting for are often actually quite simple and easy and understandable and made complex by people who want to keep us out of them. And so that's the work.
That's great.
Absolutely. So I want to riff on that point just a little bit because I thought that was excellent, especially on the work that you talked about. That's the research part of it. It doesn't just live in the hallowed halls of academia, that this is stuff that has to happen at the local level that people have to be involved in. That is so incredibly important, and the notion that that can be participatory, that it should be, that itself is a part of the organizing, right? That itself, that research itself is a part of the organizing. I've been the executive director, in addition to the case made, I've been executive director of an organization called the Redress Movement, which is a national organization to get at the issues around redlining and to have folks to go back to those institutions that have played a part in redlining communities and racially segregating communities nationally, to do something about it. Our notion is that it's not enough to have conversations that are apologetic about redlining. How many of you sat in rooms like, it's such a bad thing, that was so awful. We want to apologize for decades and decades of undermining the success of so many folks, especially Black and brown folks, that it's not enough, right? That we are done with the politics of apology, and we need to get on to the business of getting the work done. And one of the first parts of that is the research. And when it's so interesting when people actually start to do the work, to look at their deeds, to look at who was involved in the history of how their neighborhoods and communities got shaped. And what's interesting about that is a lot of this, because folks were so egregious, right, in terms of the way they were talking about how neighborhoods were shaped, they were so egregious. There's documentation of folks having very specific conversations. The boards of realtors, the chambers of commerce, a lot of the academic institutions having very explicit conversations of who was not worthy of living, right, in nicer places. And the benefit of having community members involved in going to get that information out of the archives that most of you can probably get in your, city halls and other places like that where there are archival data in your libraries. The benefit of having folks go back and get that information is, one, they get energized by it, like, wait a minute, right? In my line of work, I call that getting the receipts. We go and get the receipts so that when we start to have conversations with institutions that have been historically involved in this conversation, this is not about conjecture or conspiracy theory. We bring receipts. Here is an explicit set of conversations and policies that were created to keep people out of power, out of thriving neighborhoods, So now we're about to have a conversation about how we're about to get inclusive. What does it look like for this institution to show up differently? And there are a lot of folks around the conversation who are having redress conversations, not because politicians are saying you need to do this, but because average, everyday, ordinary folks, right, are doing the research, finding this and saying, wait a minute, this is explicit and this should never be the case. So that ability to like get people organized to sort of say, not only can you go get this information and be the source of that data, be the source of those receipts, but now we can organize around the power that you're building. I want to say to each of you, I want to pose the question to think about and talk to this group of very thoughtful housing folks about what organizing means. Because I think when people think about organizing, they think we just kind of get people to show up at the state legislature and we make signs together, and then we go and like put our signs up and say like we need more housing, housing is a right, and then we go home and then we try to do it again like the next day. They think that's the context of it, and it's not. There's so much more to what this is, and I want folks really to get what it takes to do this kind of organizing very thoughtfully. Why don't I start with you, Joseph, and then we'll come back to Akira.
Yeah, so PICO certainly doesn't have a market on the answer to this question, but I will share from my own experience that to understand organizing requires some basis in how we understand what we call the public square. So we understand that no condition in our world exists by accident. That everything that you see, the way it's been set up, is set up that way because it benefits some people, some interests for it to be set up that way. Our system of incarceration and criminal justice system, our immigration system, our housing system, our healthcare system are designed the way they are because people are profiting off of it. And oftentimes, interests are profiting off of the misery of people who are trapped in the inadequacies of those systems. So that's one thing. The second thing is to understand that systems don't change on their own. That what is required to change systems is the exertion of power from the outside. Cornel West says that we will only ever get as much justice as we have the power to compel. Mm-hmm. So the third thing I'll say is that we understand power to be about our ability to shift the self-interest of people in positions of power. Yes. Our elected officials make decisions about what they're going to do and what they're not going to do based upon their calculus of what is in their interest. And that interest is determined by many forces that are vying to control them. And so organizing is about getting in that messy mix of the public square in an effort to build power that is rooted in people and that is rooted in people most proximate to the injustices of our society. I will say for PICO, we are also very intentional about our belief that the ends don't always justify the means, that the way we build power is in many ways more important than what we're building power for. That is the policy change or the systems change that we're aiming for. We really believe in multiracial power, multi-coalitional power, for pragmatic reasons and for principled reasons, I think. Mm-hmm. The pragmatic reason is because the forces that stand against our desired changes are immensely powerful. And we need as many folk as we can get who share a set of values to row in the same direction, to link arms across difference, and to push those forces to do what is moral, to do the right thing. That's the pragmatic reason, but I think the principled reason from a faith-based, spiritually rooted organization is that we believe that being together in all of our difference is how God intended us to be. It's how our Creator intended us to be. We were intended to walk with and for each other across difference towards a better future. Not only for the people who look like me and for people who I consider to be my people, but for a wider circle of human concern. And I'll just share a brief story, and then I'd love to hear Kira's thoughts on this. My brother is formerly incarcerated. My brother was addicted to heroin for many years. And he got arrested for trying to rob a bank. And he was put in prison. He was convicted of 2 felonies. And I come from a very close-knit Mexican Catholic family. And we always make tamales at Christmas time. And that Christmas was very difficult. We had an assembly line of my family and my primos and my primas with hojas de maíz and the masa and all the ingredients you put into making tamales. And it was somber, but my mom thought it was really important for us to be together. She said, we got to get together even though Mateo, your brother, is not here. And I'll never forget, at one point, it was a mess. There was hojas and masa all over our shirts and all on the ground and chicken and all this stuff everywhere. And my mom looked up at us and she started to cry, and she said through her tears, she said, familia, she said, look at us. We're all messy, but we're together. We're messy, but we're together, and that is what matters. And part of what I worry about in how we're going about doing social change today is we're doing it in a very balkanized way, where we demand ideological purity in order to do anything together. You have to agree with me on everything, every policy position that I hold dear, before I will walk hand in hand with you. Now, I'm not saying we should create a big tent and invite anyone and everyone into it. We do have to share a set of values and a worldview. But how we get there is going to be messy. And we're all contradictory. We're all paradoxical beings. We're all trying to be better versions of ourselves, but we're going to make mistakes. And we're going to hold biases that sometimes show up. And to be generous with each other and to say, you know what? You might not be where I want you to be. I might not be where you want me to be. But we're going to walk together because we share a vision and a desire and a hunger for change. And I think that is what it's going to take to really fundamentally organize in new and different ways, given the polarization of our country today.
Yeah. I love that. If I could, there's so much of what you said there that's really beautiful to me. And I think part of it is that at the heart of organizing is about people. I heard that, and it's not just about, we often talk about the idea that you have to organize enough people that we can be idealistic, that we can't, if we just organize enough people to do what's practical today, we already know it's not enough. It won't solve the problem, and we'll just be moving the pieces around. So we've got to get more people involved. But I think part of that for us is also and this is important for an organization that does research, I encourage people at CPI, every day we wake up and we think of an actual human being. It can be just a real person that's out there in the world. And think about what are the challenges they do. So I do this exercise every night before I go to bed. And I think this is part of the heart of the organizing experiment. It's I lay down at bed and I think, who is the person out in San Diego that I'm gonna get up for tomorrow? And often for me, it's a woman. She's worked all day. She has put her kids to bed, maybe a little bit hungry, maybe a little worried about where they're gonna sleep tomorrow or if they're gonna make rent. She's done everything right that she can do, and this system still does not work for her. And for me, that means if I keep that person alive in my head, or your brother alive in my head, if I keep those people there, it means I talk about policy in a way that's not abstract, that's not just about moving numbers around. And that speaks to all kinds of audiences, right? That speaks to the people I want, the everyday people I want to join us in this fight, but that also speaks to elected officials who are everyday people at the end of the day, especially when you do this work at the local level. The elected officials you have are people in some cities, you all know this, they're people who have a day job. They do this part-time. They're trying to figure it out. They're part of our community that we're organizing together. There are researchers out there with information that we need, but part of getting them to be part of this this experience of organizing is breaking down the jargon. Stop not thinking that we're the experts, but realizing that that human being that we imagine, that we put in the front of our head, who might be someone we know, someone we saw on the street today, that's the person we're supposed to be talking to with the information that we have. That's the person we're supposed to be developing policy with. And for me, that is like putting people at the center of it, real people at the center of everything we do. That's something that regardless of our role in this movement, we can do to make ourselves more powerful.
Yeah, that's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now I want to ask a sensitive question. There's always that moment when the sensitive question happens, right? And this is the essential question about if we're organizing everyday folks, what about the folks that we work with who have lots of power and privilege, and what we do to organize them? I was having a meeting with a group of folks who do billions of dollars of investments every year, and they wanted to think through how they invite a sort of equity lens, a diversity, inclusion, and justice lens to the kinds of investments that they're making. And we were talking with them about what they needed to do to make that lens happen. It's something we do all the time at Case Made. And it was invited into this room, and it was clear that folks were thinking about this in such transactional ways. They wanted to get down to the business of like, okay, so what are questions do we need to ask to get at this? And what is it? Do we have to look at just the boards of the organizations? What is it that we have to do, right? And I just said, can we just stop? Let's just have a moment. And I asked them to just think about, just for a moment, why we're doing this exercise. And I said, not because you think your organization looks good if you have a DEIJ lens or DEIB lens, but for you personally, what is your investment in a world that is more inclusive for you, for your children, for where you live, for the world you want to? What is that? And I had them go around the room, these folks in, the suits, right? To do that. And it was interesting, they all got it all into it, my kids, and I want a better future for them, and I'm concerned about what's happening, and, and they got all into it. And once they finished doing that, I said, good. Now, as we do the next part of this work, I want you to remember that, what you just said about why this is important. Not the transaction of it and the questions we need to ask and the forms folks need to fill out and how we're going to put this into our Salesforce system and Because I said this conversation is going to get hard. It's not easy to do what we're trying to do. We're trying to shift billions of dollars, right? So when it gets hard and it gets tough in this room, I need you to go back to what you just said about why you're here, because that's the thing that's going to center us. So I want to ask you too, you folks are doing this all the time in the work that you do, where it's not just a matter of organizing, right, the folks who are in communities, the folks that we want to benefit, right, from who have been left out, but it's also the folks who have power and privilege, who are making decisions every day in a very transactional way, and we are in those spaces trying to shift the way that those decisions are made. Talk to me a little bit about how you handle that. What is it that you do to not only shift the work, but the culture of the conversation that's happening in those spaces?
I'll try it. I think what you just talked about, I felt that there was a lot of love in that, right? So the first thing is that walking into any room, no matter the power of the people, and having like a real human connection and love for people centers our work. And then I think if I start from that place of, each of these people is a real human being with a real set of challenges, and I'm willing to also be in disagreement for a little bit, right? If I walk in, and we have this privilege, right, of working with elected officials over the years, or working with people who run agencies, and if we build the right kind of relationships at work, it should be space to also say, you're gonna be mad at me right now, but I'm going to bring a group of people here to talk to you, and you need to listen. That is one, being able to speak truth to people in power, to say, you need to listen, you don't actually know all the answers. And things that you think you know may be really fundamentally wrong. And all of us have to be willing to entertain that. Because the truth is, I wrote myself a note, like, we are all wrong and deeply wrong about something. If we were not wrong and deeply wrong, we would have solved these problems already.
Yeah.
So we're wrong and we're deeply wrong. So the willingness to sit in a space and listen to someone who you might think does not know the answers is you are incorrect. And there are gaps you have to fill. So I think, one, at CPI, part of our role of being that bridge between different worlds and different groups of people is to hold the space in that conflict and say, like, we're on everybody's side, but we're gonna hold everyone accountable to being willing to listen and willing to learn. I also think it's really, something else you said was about power and privilege. I don't wanna get this wrong. There are obviously people with a lot of power, and there are a lot of people who experience their lives with a lot of situations where they don't have power. But there is none of us who does not have privilege in some space, right? There is none of us who doesn't, if nothing else, like I experience the power, like I have a lot of power over a small child that I am raising. I have a lot of power, although sometimes not as much as I think, which is a good reminder. But so actually asking each person to think about that. What is the privilege that you bring into this space? What are the set of assumptions you bring into this space? And how do I, not just what do I come to learn, but how do I intend to show up? And making that something that people take on as their personal responsibility, from elected officials to the people that we bring into a room. Like I can say to someone, an everyday person, there are parts of your life that people can't see. You have to tell them. You have to make those present and apparent to folks. And there are biases that you bring, sometimes out of really deep experience. I've had people who will say, I'm not gonna go talk to that elected official. They never do anything we want. They never pay any attention to us. But you just never know the story that reaches someone. You never know the piece of information that opens that door. And so I think another piece of it is like holding the tension of never fully giving up on anyone, being willing to try one more time, but recognizing that some of us have more privilege to do that. I get more wins, so I have to go into more hard places than I would ask someone who's not experiencing that. So I think those are some of the pieces for me about thinking about that. But what are you thinking, Justin?
That's so rich, yeah. I mean, there's so much to say. A few years ago when I first started organizing, I was organizing in Orange County, mostly in northern Orange County with immigrant communities, communities of color, working class neighborhoods in Anaheim, Santana, West Fullerton. But we also had a few communities we worked with in southern Orange County, folks with a little bit more privilege. And I remember a pastor, this Presbyterian pastor, who loved the work we were doing, deeply believed in social justice. He said, Joseph, he's like, part of what I find difficult with the folks in my congregation, in my community, is so many of them were born on third base and think they hit a triple. But nonetheless, folks, like in our world, we say we take people where they're at, not where we want them to be. We also don't leave them there. So folks can start with some of these, having consumed these stories about themselves and the world, but people can go on a journey and become different. They can think differently about the world. They can understand how racism is bad for all of us. It's worse for some of us than others, but at the end of the day, it's hurting all of us. And I love Heather McGhee's work. Heather McGhee is one of my heroes. She wrote a book recently called The Sum of Us, and she uses this analogy of public swimming pools in the early part of last century. And she says, there was a massive amount of public investment in public institutions, in roads, in schools, in public health systems, in parks, and in some cases, communities in the South, where Kira's from, built these public swimming pools. And as soon as those pools were desegregated, as soon as people of color, in particular Black folk, could use those pools, and the laws were changed, the white folks who ran these towns and cities poured concrete into these public swimming pools so that not only the black folk couldn't use the swimming pools anymore, but the white folks couldn't either. And so racism actually makes us do things that are irrational. It actually makes us act against our self-interest. I share that story not because I'm trying to preach here, but because there are folks who come to a different realization about themselves and about the world around them when they are proximate to people who are really hurt when concrete is poured into the public swimming pool, and when housing is as unequal as it is today. And so the last thing I'll say about this is part of the magic, part of, I think, the conditions we try to create in PICO and in organizing is for those folks with some privilege to be in relationship with folks who are living the reality of poverty and injustice and exclusion every day. And just that proximity, just that ability to be close to someone who has lived a very different life than they have, opens up doors that could never be opened if we just try to convince them that they should think about the world differently or that they should sign on to a policy or a values agenda. So I think it goes back to what you're saying, Kira, about the critical importance of our proximity and regular proximity to people who every day experience the consequences of life on the periphery.
Absolutely. I want to, I love that, and I want to riff off that a little bit too. And I'm going to ask a question for all of us to answer, and the question is about if there was one sort of tool in your tool belt that you felt like was really the thing that is fighting above its fighting weight. Like the tool, there are many different tools you got to have in your tool belt to do organizing and power building well. But if there's one in particular that you think is really really important, folks who know me know that I would say from my vantage point, it is the strength of your case making, the ability to make a strong case for something in the face of, right, all kinds of fake news, dominant narratives, all kinds of stuff that just doesn't always benefit us. Like that is a superpower if you know how to do it. And I want to piggyback off of what you're saying, but just about for me, it's one of the sort of principles of case making, which is having people understand that they're keeping some folks from something else actually hurts them. Like our ability to do that is important. And what I loved about the example that you shared was it's not, as Heather McGee's example, but it's not in theory. Like some of us, when we talk about housing, we say housing really benefits everybody. When you allow folks to have a decent place to live, everybody benefits, right? But I would say being not only just proximate to folks, but having those very tangible examples of how people's lives are changed, right, when they get housing, but also what happens to all of us, right, when they're not. Because when people don't have those tangible examples, they don't really feel it. I'll just give one example, and then I'll ask you that question about what's in your tool belt. I was called to the National Academies of Medicine with a bunch of health folks across the country, and they were just talking about, it's been 10 years since the National Academies put out this report where they were talking about how our life expectancy in the United States was so far removed from other industrialized nations, right? If you live in the United States, you are not likely to live as long as your counterparts in other industrialized nations. They came out with a report 10 years ago that said that, and they had another meeting this past year in March to talk about what's happened since. So I'll ask you all, what do you think has happened in the last 10 years since they did that report? The report was saying we need to make all these changes in the health space to get up to where the other industrialized nations are. What do you think has happened in the last 10 years? Let's think about that. No surprise. Not only did, it's interesting, almost all of the other industrialized nations experienced a increase in life expectancy, so they're living even longer than they were 10 years ago, right, because of the kinds of investments they're making in the health space. But the United States went down. So the difference between where we are really and the other industrialized nations is dramatic. And we are outspending all of them, right, in healthcare. And here's the part that I think is important for us. It's not just that poor people in the United States are living shorter lives. is that if you're rich in America, you're living less than rich people in any of these other industrialized nations. We have can I just say that, something that we have a piss poor system in the United States around providing health care and housing, and it's hurting all of us, right? Even if you're rich, you too should be living longer, and you could be, right, if we were organizing our systems differently. And the challenge for these health folks was that the conversation they're trying to have is really not about healthcare. The conversation they were talking about was, Dr. T, we're trying to have a conversation about healthcare because what's challenging our life expectancy is we don't control guns, we don't regulate them, so we're killing each other, right? We're shooting each other like crazy. We have a food system that, right, doesn't provide folks healthy foods. We are having folks, right, be drug addicted because of the availability of drugs that should not be, right, available to folks. The levels of suicide, deaths of despair, and alcoholism, those are not things that happen in a doctor's office, right? Those are things that are happening in community, and because people don't have a decent place to live. How do we as health professionals say, you can invest, right, billions more if you want to, and it won't affect life expectancy because what folks need to thrive, we're not giving them that, right? That's so core for us in case making, and especially in the housing space, to give those tangible examples. We got a piss poor housing system, and everybody, right, is in a position where we're not living our best lives because of it, and let's give them tangible examples that get us there. So from my vantage point, the skill set in my pocket is case making, y'all. We have to do a better job of helping people understand that. Let me ask you too, in your tool belt, right? What's the thing that, man, if we just all could have that skill set, it would make all the difference?
Yeah, I think one of the things I think we need to develop a better capacity for is strategy. Is to do strategy when we're trying to pass complex policies in complex systems like housing. And I think too often we sort of assume that if we just bring a righteous demand and lots of people, that we're going to convince and compel policymakers to do what we want them to do, and that's rarely the case. Oftentimes we have to create permutations of allies, sometimes unlikely allies, to kind of chart a course together and to move a strategy over a long period of time that inevitably requires pivots and shifts and a sense of how power is moving. And I just think like organizations like CPI are so important because they help us be better at strategy, be better at thinking 3 steps ahead, be better at imagining unlikely allies. Quick story about this. One of the things that I despair about is the fact that when I started organizing 18 years ago, the first issue I worked on was housing. One of the things that gives me hope is that there's 2,000 of you in the room today, and that there's a growing commitment amongst people to fundamentally solving this crisis, getting upstream, getting at the root causes. But when I was a young mocoso organizer, back in 2005, 2006, some of you might have been around for this. I was organizing in Anaheim, and I was working at a church called St. Boniface. St. Boniface has 10,000 mostly immigrant families living in overcrowded, substandard housing. And their need, their concern was a desire for more affordable housing. They couldn't pay the rent. They wanted a little more space for their children to do their homework, etc. And through our research with groups like CPI, with unlikely allies, some small business owners, some labor partners, we learned that one of the reasons Anaheim wasn't building more affordable housing was because it was restricted in a part of the city called the Resort District. And for those of you who know Anaheim, there is a resort in Anaheim. It's a well-known resort called Disneyland. And Disney had control of most of the city council. and they had gotten the council to designate an area around Disney Park, a pretty large area, as off limits for affordable housing, even though the workers at Disneyland and the companies that service them, the hotels, the catering companies, et cetera, depended on affordable housing and needed affordable housing. I think there was a sense that people didn't want working class people of color walking around their family vacation. So we had a big town hall forum at this church at St. Boniface. We got 500 people out, some of our unlikely partners who at times we were on opposite sides of other issues on, but we said Disney has too much power in Anaheim, and they are limiting our ability to build the housing we need for all kinds of folks. And I remember there was 5 city council members, we had 2 of the 5 with us. And then there was a swing voter who we really needed to get on board with us. So we invited our champion, one of the city council members, and we invited the swing city council member to this town hall forum. 500 people on a Wednesday night at St. Boniface. All the press from LA came, the LA Times was there. And I remember an hour before the town hall started, the swing vote on the city council called the pastor of the church and said, "I'm not coming." He said, "I'm not coming to this town hall forum anymore. Count me out." And our organized team was so upset that we said, you know what? We're going to leave an empty chair on the stage for this city council member. And we're going to put her name on the chair and let everyone know she iced us. She chose not to show up. And the strategy moment, this moment of huge pressure where we got these immigrants together with our labor partners, some small business owners, unlikely allies together and say, what do we do here? And the ultimate decision was to not put an empty chair up there because we said we really need her vote and we don't want to alienate her long term. The next day, in the LA Times California section on the front page, the headline said, Disneyland, not the happiest place on earth. And 2 weeks later, we brought out 500 more people to the city council. And a few months later, 3,000 new units of affordable housing were built in Anaheim. I share that story with you all because you all, I think, come from different camps within the housing apparatus, the housing ecosystem. And just imagine if we were unlikely allies at some level in looking for bigger change and trying to work for bigger change, not settling just for the incremental policy fixes we get here and there. But if we were really to overcome what Dr. King called the tranquilizing drug of gradualism and say we're actually going to do something really big together. We're going to figure out where our self-interests align, and we're going to take on the forces, some of whom you have the phone numbers for, some of whom you have relationships with, to really fundamentally shift how our housing system works.
Mm-hmm. Kara, I'm going to give you the last word. I'm going to say we're almost out of time, but I want to give you the last word.
I'm going to take it and I'm going to make it really short. My secret weapon, the tool that we have in our belt is working with amazing people and listening and partnering in a deep and meaningful way to make change together. That's it.
I love it. Join me in thanking our panelists today. These are awesome folks who are doing the work every single day. So I think we are going to come up for the next panel. Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. T, Joseph, and Kyra for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for inspiring us and energizing us and making us walk away with something to think about. Thank you to Wells Fargo for serving as our title sponsor for this event. And thank you once again to all of our attendees, sponsors, partners, Housing California staff, board members. We really appreciate your participation in this year's conference. Just a few announcements before we close. Please do not forget to complete the end of conference survey. There are a lot of prizes if you complete that survey. And we look forward to seeing you at our 45th annual conference, March 6th through the 8th, 2024 in Long Beach. So please save the date. And folks, we're not done yet. There are more classes and workshops starting at 1:30, and we hope to see you next year. Thank you for your participation.